What are the effects of artificial food dyes in children? If your child gets emotional, irritable, or agitated after eating foods with food dyes in them, you want to listen to this episode. In this video, I'm covering the effects of artificial food colors on the behavior of any child. First, I'll talk about the connections between food dyes and children's behavior. Then I'll describe why artificial food colors are in our food supply. Then you're going to learn about the difference between natural food dye and artificial food dye, and how our government regulates artificial food colorings. Last, I'm going to teach you how much artificial food dye is safe for your child. I'm Jill Castle. I am the founder of The Nourished Child. I'm a pediatric dietitian and mom of 4. And today we are talking about artificial food dyes and how they affect a child's behavior. There's been some recent research that's come out just this past spring in 2021 that I wanted to update you about. It's very interesting, and it is sort of shepherding us down this path of learning more and more about how artificial food colors affect our children. Since our food supply continues to blossom and with that growth get more and more complicated, it's important for you to understand how the ingredients in food may affect your child's overall behavior. I'd like to know, before we get started, what worries you most about artificial food colors and the diet and behavior of your child? Write down in the comments below. Let me know what worries you the most. And make sure you keep listening to the very end, because I'm going to tell you exactly how much artificial food dyes your child can have. I'll give you that upper limit that we are regarding as safe. Okay, let's talk about the connection of food dyes and a child's behavior. What I've grown to know in my 30 plus years of experience as a pediatric dietitian is that artificial food colors can take its toll, can have an effect on any child. There's a lot of talk about children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, but we know from current understandings and research that food dyes and artificial food colorings can affect any child. In the case of ADHD, not all children with ADHD are sensitive to food colorings, and not all children who have a food sensitivity to food dyes have ADHD. So it's really important for us to kind of open our brain a little bit more and realize that artificial food dyes may have an impact on any child's behavior. One study, though, in the category of ADHD showed that up to 8% of children had negative behavior from exposure to artificial food colors. Hyperactivity is the most common altered behavior that we see in kids with ADHD who are sensitive to artificial food colorings. The Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment came out with a report in April of 2021. This was done by the California Environmental Protection Agency. They did a review on studies of synthetic food colors, and here is what they found. I'm going to read it to you because I want to get it accurate. They suggest that synthetic food dyes are associated with adverse neurobehavioral effects such as inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and restlessness in sensitive children. This is sort of groundbreaking because up until this point, most of our research we had on sensitivity to food dyes was done on children with ADHD. This is groundbreaking in that it is really making it very clear that a child does not have to have ADHD to show a sensitivity to artificial food dyes. So you might wonder, why are artificial food colors even in our food supply? Well, they are added to our foods to either maintain or enhance their appearance. They might bring color to food that might not be that colorful, for example. They might be added to food to enhance or brighten colors that are already in the food. They might be added to bring color to food that might not have any color at all, for example, candy. They might be added to prevent loss of color from the environment or from storage over time. And last, they can be added to food to keep the product consistent over time, because with age, colors fade. So it can keep the product much more consistent and appealing to the consumer over time. The 4 most widely used artificial food colors are red number 40, yellow number 5, blue number 1, and yellow number 6. So you might be wondering, what is the difference between an artificial food dye versus a natural food dye? And there is a difference, and I want to take a moment to explain that to you. So let's start with the natural food colorings. These are food colorings that come from natural sources of food. So think about apples with a red peel or a green peel, or think about strawberries or blueberries. When you mash them up, you get a strong color of red or blue. These are natural food dyes, natural food colors. And they don't add any nutritional value, but they can impart color to food. Now, things like beta carotene, which you'll find in carrots, grape skin extract from grapes, or that yellow color you get from saffron, the spice. These can also, in addition to adding color to food, they can add health benefits as well. Now, artificial food colors or artificial food dyes are produced from chemicals. And there are 2 types of artificial food colors, dyes and lakes. Dyes are water soluble, meaning that they dissolve in water, and they typically come in a powder, granule, or liquid form. Lakes are fat soluble, and you'll typically find them in products that contain fats or oils. How are artificial food colors regulated? Well, our government, the FDA, regulates artificial food colors in food. They guarantee the safety and purity of artificial food colorings. Now, a long time ago, back in the 1960s to 1980s, the FDA identified an acceptable daily intake for the human population. These are also called ADIs, and they are really related to synthetic food dyes. Now, the FDA considers artificial food dyes to be safe for human consumption, but it's also important to note that the studies that they conducted and the limits that they set, these ADIs, were done decades ago, when our food supply looked very different than what it does today. In fact, if you look at what's happened across the lake over in Europe, the European Union has taken off the market red number 40, yellow number 5, and yellow number 6. Artificial food colors that we routinely have in our current food supply here in the United States. They placed warning labels also on all food products that had any artificial food dyes within them. And by doing that, it really put manufacturers in a position where they had to rethink some of their products, because purchasing and consumption of those products were negatively impacted by these warnings on the labels. So what they ended up doing was recreating their product with natural food colors. Great idea, huh? So how much artificial food dye is safe for children? Well, first off, artificial food colors have no nutritional value for children, so having them in products doesn't give any benefit to a child and may impart a negative influence on children or a negative effect on kids. The most common foods associated with artificial food dyes tend to be beverages, soft drinks, fruit-flavored drinks, fruit juices, ice cream cones, breakfast cereals, and icings. Those are sort of the most common. But you'll also find artificial food dyes in candy, popsicles, lollipops, cakes, boxed dinners, and a ton of different snacks. Even foods that have no coloring, like icing, white icing, or white marshmallows, there are food colors, artificial food dyes added to these foods to make them appear whiter. Even other products like pickles have yellow food coloring and blue food coloring to make them look greener. I think it's a good idea to limit artificial food colors in your child's diet, particularly if you notice a change in your child's behavior when they eat these foods. So often parents will say, my child has terrible behavior when he eats sugar. I would pause and say, think about artificial food colors, because they can have that same change in behavior. It might not be sugar at all. In fact, we have less evidence around sugar causing a change in behavior than we do artificial food dyes causing a change in behavior. It's also important to note that when we look at the research on artificial food colors, some of it doesn't realistically represent what is in our current food supply now, meaning that the food dye in the foods and the impact on the child when it is measured, there's a disconnect, because the child who's being measured might not be getting the actual amount that they would get outside of a study, meaning that the results may underrepresent what a behavioral change a child could be experiencing. So, what are the recommendations? What's that ceiling? What is the upper limit of artificial food dyes for children? It's about 100 milligrams per day. So I know that number probably is like, yes, I've got the number, but you also might be like, well, wait a second. How do I really see how much artificial food color is in food? I've made a chart in an article on my website. If you go to the link above here, you'll be able to see a sampling of different foods, the artificial food color load of those foods, and the portion size that represents. You'll start to get a sense, and you'll start to see the different types of foods that are loaded with artificial food colors, and you'll get a sense of how much exposure your child may be getting. The bottom line is this: artificial food dyes have no nutritional benefit for children, and in fact, they might potentially cause harm. If you are seeing behavioral changes or any kind of effects from artificial food colors, I would be curious about that, and we can all do well by our children by downgrading some of the artificial food colors in their diet. That's it for today. If you liked this video, give me a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to this channel. I'll see you next time.